I encourage you to think about it not as an objective world out there that you're trying to control or influence, but as a tree of possibilities that has many different ways to fall into place for you.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with Skye Nelson Isaacs, who's a physicist, musician, and author of 2 books, Leap to Wholeness, How the World is Programmed to Help Us Grow, Heal, and Adapt, and Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. Skye began his pursuit of an understanding of the cosmos as a student of the yogic master Sri Swami Satchidananda, and he was less than 5 years old when that started, discovering an early fascination with holograms and some of the most fundamental questions in physics. Skye holds a master's degree in physics and has sought for over 2 decades to establish a scientific connection between synchronicity, wholeness, and flow. His most recent research on holism has been published in the scientific journal Quantum Reports. His mission is to contribute to a transformation of the human nature, which enables us to become more whole and have healing conversations about privilege, equity, and climate justice. An educator with 9 years of classroom experience, Nelson Isaacs is also a multi-instrumentalist and professional performer of award-winning original musical compositions. Wow. Thanks so much for joining us today, Skye.
Thanks, Heather. It's great to be on the show and talk with you.
Wow. You're my first theoretical physicist on the show. And I'm afraid that the audience is probably scared because it's physics, you know? And I remember...
There won't be a test.
Good. No tests and no math, right?
No math.
Please.
Not on audio. When we get a whiteboard in front of us, we can do that.
Okay. And maybe there's some math going on in your head. I'm not sure. But we don't have to do any calculations. That's good.
I try to give visuals, in place of mathematics that helps people visualize it in their head.
Totally. Yes. When I contemplate concepts from physics, I start by feeling like these concepts are kind of outside of me. But then as I contemplate them longer, I start to feel like somehow it's talking about how my brain works.
Yeah. And what I do in my teaching process is I even come up with meditations that walk you through a concept, like a physics concept, because different ways of learning are really become powerful when you're thinking about physics. And physics is the study of the underlying cosmos. So how could it not be physical? How could it not be felt?
So how did you actually become a theoretical physicist? What was it that drew you to that field?
Well, physics is the study of the underlying most fundamental aspects of the world we live in, space and time. And it was also introduced early on to these questions of what is the reality we live in from a Vedantic perspective, studying the tradition of yoga and sort of being immersed in that community. And so to me, there's always been an underlying nature to reality that seems to be hidden. And the idea of karma was pretty interesting to me, that there's an underlying reason or organization to the events that happen in life. So, maybe when we have an illness, it's not just a random situation that's happening, but it's actually teaching us something useful in our lives. Or when we have a divorce or something that is really meaningful in our lives that can be seen as a really difficult situation. I've also seen those events be really transformational. And so is there a way in which the experiences we have in life are built, or I use the word programmed, are programmed to help us grow and heal, not just to knock us down and, make us feel like we don't have any control, but to get into more of a sense of flow where we're not trying to take control, but we feel empowered. We feel like we have a role in our lives to make change. And this is such an important thing right now, to feel like we have the capacity to make change, because we are the only ones who do. And we have these massive issues, whether it's medicine or the climate or racism and privilege, these massive issues that we're needing to deal with together. And that really involves feeling empowered in our lives and not feeling like we're just at the whim of the situation that we're in.
This is probably a whole rabbit hole, but since you brought it up about what we can do to have control in our lives, to influence our lives, it's probably a rabbit hole in a way, right? It's about fate versus free will. But I guess I'll ask the question in like two parts. How much control do you actually think we have over our destiny if there's this whole thing going on that is bigger than us, that is affecting us? And how does a holistic perspective actually make our choices easier or harder?
Well, let me give a story of my journey through wellness that illustrates how I got thinking about synchronicity more deeply and how it sort of plays into the answer to your question. About 2 decades ago, I was just out of college and I was wanting to, make a mark in the world, figure out what was my career path. And I had finished my physics degree, my bachelor's, and I didn't want to just jump into that as a career because I also was a musician and I wanted to make a mark as a musician. And I was actually fighting in myself, like fighting for certain ideals that I'm still fighting for, like social justice or environmental justice, looking at, can we build a society that's more on a track towards well-being, because clearly it's been obvious for a long time that we haven't been. But I took this on from a point of view that was, pretty young and unexperienced. And I cut my hair all the way back just to make a statement. And I purchased a vehicle that I could travel in. And I got on the road with my instruments and I drove to Los Angeles. And I spent about 3 months trying to make connections in Los Angeles and play music and, build a career out of my music talents. But I was also going through a period of time where I was really disciplined in my spiritual practice. And I was getting more and more intense on how do I build a spiritual practice. And I was practicing intermittent fasting and meditation and yoga and physical exercise. And after a few months of this traveling, I decided to move in with a friend of mine down in that area so I could have a little bit more of a stable route. And over the next few months, I wasn't able to make a difference in my professional world. I wasn't making the contacts I needed to in music. And I was getting more and more focused on my own, how well am I disciplined here? I was sort of turning the lack of success in on myself and how could I become a more perfect person? So I was trying to make myself perfectly healthy, perfectly disciplined, perfectly aligned with my spiritual path. And this really backfired on me because it hit a point where I ended up getting lost in the woods and had to go into the hospital, and they couldn't really take care of an IV for me because my body was so emaciated. My dad came and sort of rescued me from that situation, pulled me home, and I got treatment for recovery from that situation. And what was really powerful about that situation, it was a series of choices. And I recognized the choices I had made to continue to go into not self-care, right? The opposite of self-care, like self-improvement at the expense of self-care, at the expense of self-compassion and love. And I had a dream while this was happening right at the end where I was banging my head against a wall in the bedroom that I lived in as a kid. And I was just banging my head against a wall. Like, this isn't helping me at all. I'm just working hard, but not getting anywhere. So what that really shifted for me is it opened up like these choices didn't work. The choice of ultra discipline, of ultra intensity didn't work. And so from then on, I began rebuilding my life. I became a physics teacher and I continued to build my music career. And over time, I've written a couple of books and engaged in research, published 4 or 5 papers on the underlying synchronicities that I've experienced, like in that situation, which had guided me on my path. And it really comes down to what is the nature of the choices that we're making. So I think in terms of destiny, we are guiding our destiny, but there's not one particular outcome. If I had been able to readjust my path and stop banging my head against a wall, I probably could have come out of that situation without having to, really hurt myself. But in the experience I did have, where I had to learn that lesson, really did help me reestablish a foundation of confidence over the long term. So I think that we're like climbing a tree, and we get to these choice points where we can go left or right, and we go one way and we get to a difficult situation. And then the next time that happens, we get to the same kind of choice on the tree. We might make a different decision. And this is how the synchronicities, the meaningful moments of choice that happen, can be useful elements of teachers on our path of growth.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And it sounds like there was a lot of learning that took place in that. And
yeah.
Well, the part that I was, I guess, wondering, because we've all had this experience where we've made bad decisions, all of us, right? But then the question is, what makes something a bad decision? Because I get caught up a lot in this idea that there is, well, you could probably tell me more about this from your experience, but this idea that we're being guided by some past conditioning versus we're being guided by the sensory experience that is right in front of us right now. Do you think that was coming up for you in that? Was that a part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there's a distinction between self-care and self-interest, and they're not the same. So some people feel like they don't want to take care of themselves because it's sort of a selfish focus or it's just self-interest. And I think of self-care as coming from wholeness. And by wholeness, I mean seeing yourself clearly, seeing the conditioning that you're speaking about, the past conditioning clearly. And in that situation that I was in, I wasn't able to do that. And so I would say self-interest or the lack of self-care comes from a place of lack. Like, I'm not good enough, really is what it comes down to. We sort of point the finger sometimes at other people. This person let me down. But it really comes back to, I'm not good enough. Because when we feel whole, when we feel like we have what we need to thrive, we actually don't look at other people and point out that they've let us down because we're not relying on them. A key element of how synchronicity can change our perspective on our lives is seeing that we're part of a bigger whole. Because so often, the solutions that I'm seeking, they don't come from the place that I expect. And situations go in unusual directions. And the synchronicities or the coincidences that help me on my path happen at unusual times. So I have to be looking for the opportunities with an open mind. So looking to the whole rather than to the specific person to solve our problem or bring us an opportunity is a way of seeing beyond our past conditioning and opening our minds to the way that the cosmos, which I see as responsive, is supporting us on our journey. And I have another story of synchronicity that someone shared with me in my book around a woman who experienced this in her journey of trying to get pregnant. And she had been trying to get pregnant with her husband for some time. And she was working for the government in a job where she worked locally. And they decided to start trying intervention from medicine for fertility. And at that same time, so they started that process, and it was a little bit stressful, as anybody who's been through that experience, like I have been through that experience, can know. It can be stressful. And then her job transferred her from the location that was nearby to an office that was an hour and a half away, or maybe it was 3 hours away. It was a long way. So suddenly she found herself having to commute. And what was unusual about this was it was totally out of the blue. Like, there was no reason to transfer her, but something happened which made it necessary for her to be transferred. So she was frustrated at first and decided that because she was traveling so far to work, she didn't really have time to continue focusing on fertility. So she and her husband had to go through a process of allowing that disappointment, grieving, stopping that fertility treatments for the time being, and went through a process of healing that part of themselves that was struggling. I think 2 years later, the position changed and she was transferred back to her town. So her life became simpler logistically. And at the same time, she and her husband got pregnant naturally. And so it was the moving away from the local job to create this difficult tension where she was traveling a long way that allowed her to ultimately get pregnant the way that she had originally intended. But in the moment, it felt like a diversion away from her goals. So we can look at the situation that's happening to us, which might seem difficult or frustrating or against the flow, possibly as leading towards something that is in service of our goals. This is the process of opening up to the wholeness of what's possible by looking inside and being honest with ourselves and vulnerable, like grieving, feeling the grief, the disappointment that we have with our life, and allowing that process to really happen and be healed. But then recognizing that there's still other ways that our goals can be reached through the flow of the wholeness of opportunities that come to us through synchronicity. So did I connect the dots well there?
Absolutely. And, that's the hardest thing, right? Because a lot of people were like, we want what we want and it's not happening. And it's so frustrating, whether it's a woman trying to get pregnant or somebody trying to build a business or whatever that thing is. It's one of the hardest things is when we decide that we want something and we know exactly how it's supposed to happen. But
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by synchronicity. And I will say that maybe it's because I feel like when I experience it, it comes with this wonder and awe, and it just feels so amazing when it happens. Mm-hmm. And I guess coming from this very selfish place, I wonder, is there a way to actually increase the synchronicity in our lives? Is there a method by which we could do that?
There's a method that I use called the Lorax process, just a simplification of being observant in a new way. So the Lorax is Lorrax, and it stands for listening first. And listening doesn't just mean with your ears. It means paying attention to everything happening. So when my friend was listening to her life and she noticed that she got transferred to another place, she also looked inside herself, like, what does this mean for my journey in fertility? And what does that mean for my feelings? How am I responding to that? So listening to all these elements and then having an open mind. That's the O. And an open mind means, you have some preconceptions. You have your past conditioning. And that is limiting. It serves as a filter, which limits what you're able to see. And it limits our ability to see opportunities that might be hidden or dressed up in the form of loss. And so by opening our minds, we're basically saying maybe to life, not saying, oh, that's a good thing or that's a bad thing, but maybe this is going to work for me. I'm going to have an open mind. And then the third step is reflecting. And this can take some time. For my friend who was trying to get pregnant, this was maybe a period of a year or so where she was reflecting on having to stop treatment for the time being, what that meant for her, what was her journey really trying to get, what was the experience she was having at a deeper level, a spiritual level, and reflecting on how this was affecting her and her husband, and could be good, could be bad. She doesn't quite know the whole story. So are there some dots she can connect? And then releasing is the second R. And once we've connected the dots and we see the situation with a little more scope, then there might be some things we have to release, releasing the expectation for how things are going to unfold in the way that we planned. And then from there, we do still have to take action, but we're able to take action in a new way because we are aligned with, or we've been listening to our situation in a deeper way. We've connected some of the dots that we couldn't see before. So this allows, it allowed my friend to continue to have an open mind to getting pregnant and not have it go the way that she expected, and continue to act with that intention in mind. And then the X at the end of the Lorax is just to recognize that this is a process that is cyclical and it just keeps going. So you never give up. You never say, oh, that just didn't work out, I'm going to stop trying. You're just listening for the next piece of information. And with synchronicity, what I've found is it's not just a positive experience. As we've talked about, it can be difficult experiences too. But everything in life seems to be carrying us on our journey. And when we can see both the positive and the negative as part of synchronicity, then we're just always on the lookout for where is the information coming from that I need to grow from right now.
That's really fascinating that you pointed that out, because I was thinking of synchronicity as only positive things when I asked that question.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true for a lot of people. And that's the difference maybe between my work and the work of Carl Jung, who developed this idea from the beginning. Although this idea of synchronicity is very ancient. Indigenous cultures live through synchronicity in many cases, and it's very much a part of their worldview. The Aboriginals from Western Australia have a notion of time which is eternal. It doesn't have past, present, or future in the same way that we do. And this is actually the same conclusion that my research in physics comes to. So I'm just replicating results that have been known for a long time in different cultures in different ways, and trying to bring those into the modern world with the language of physics, which is just another language we can use.
What is that standard view of time?
Well, in the West, the standard view of time is really influenced by the development of clocks. And it's this word chronos from ancient Greek describes this, that it's obvious that you can break up time into minutes and seconds, right? And you can count them very accurately with a nano clock, using light waves to tell exactly what time it is. And that's possible. This is getting back to the complementarity discussion earlier. We can reduce time to grains of sand in an hourglass. But that's not the only way to understand time. There is a complementary way in which time is not a grain of sand on a map, but a line across the map. And this is the sort of timeless description that comes out of my work, where you have not just where you are right now, but where you've been and where you're going as part of a journey. As soon as you start to think of time as a line through the map of our lives, you see that there's a plot to it, right? Because any journey through time has an arc to the story. It starts from one situation and it goes to another situation. And so from this, seeing time as stretched out in a line, or like that branch of a tree that goes from the base of the tree up to the leaves of the tree, then we start to see, okay, well, how does this particular path in time unfold? How is it like a story or a film strip of my life? And this is where an event in the present, like getting transferred away from your local office to an office far away, can happen in the moment, but it can be connected on a given branch to a situation where the woman gets pregnant naturally as a result of that synchronicity. So the synchronicity is really the unusual event in the moment, but it leads on this branch to an outcome that is aligned with what we're actually seeking to experience in the future.
I heard you share a story about, meeting somebody in a place and time that you didn't mean to meet them.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an intention set that still was met, even though it didn't sort of happen exactly the way you had envisioned it. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, for sure. I want to give a phrase too that sort of illustrates one of the wonderful things about this alternate view, that we often ask this question: how do we get something out of nothing? How do we create health out of our lives? Or how do we build our bank account out of nothing? Or how do we fill up our day with activities to feel good about ourselves? But this comes from a sense of lack. And what we're talking about with wholeness is the opposite of this lack. We're starting from a place of all the possibilities it could be, and we're just choosing between those possibilities. So how do we create something out of everything? It means we start from all the possibilities, all the branches of the tree, and we see all those possibilities, and we make choices which narrow down the field of options to get the one that we want. So I was journeying through Europe when I was in my early 20s. And my friend Dana was traveling also. She was studying in Israel, and we're both from the United States, and we went to high school together. And we decided, vaguely to meet while we were traveling because we were both traveling at the same time. That was a coincidence. And we decided to meet in Greece, but we didn't have a way to do that. We just sort of were figuring it would work out. While I was traveling, I got sick and I had to head home back to California, but I hadn't called her to tell her because I didn't have the money to do that. So I figured I would just do it when I got home. So I got on a train to go to Paris. My flight was out of Paris, and I had about 24 hours in Paris before my flight. So I decided to go sightsee a little bit. And I went to the Louvre Museum, and I'm in the Louvre and I'm walking around middle of the day, and I walk in this room, and there's this person that looks just like Dana. And I can't believe it. Like, I'm sitting there staring at her. I don't even introduce myself. I'm staring at her, and finally her friend looks up and says, there's a guy staring at you. So we met by accident in Paris. And you couldn't do this if you tried, right? But somehow we weren't even trying. We were trying to meet in Greece, and we met by accident at the Louvre in Paris. Well, how did she end up in Paris? She was waiting for me to call day after day, and she got an invitation from her friends to go to Paris for Fashion Week, which is an event that happens. And it's not that far to Paris from Tel Aviv, where she was, so it seemed like maybe not a big deal. But she was waiting for me to call, so she said no. But she had a call with her mom that night, and her mom just said, hey, forget about Sky, get on the plane, go to Paris, have fun. So she changed her mind and went to Paris. And this is a great example of how when you follow your own flow and what's right for you, it actually serves a higher unfolding of things, where we ended up meeting because she followed her own path rather than waiting around to try and match up with my path. So we can't predict how it's all going to unfold. And we tune into what's true for us, what's going to serve us, and that ripples outward through this cosmos of possibilities. Like a tree of all the branches, we can't see all the branches. We have to trust that when we act from a place of our own integrity, our own well-being, our own flow, that's not about self-interest, but is about self-care, is about wholeness, then the tree can align itself in ways that bring us to what we're trying to seek. And this is the great responsiveness that I think we need to understand better about the world. Because when we all act from a place of well-being in ourselves, go for the job that we really want, or leave the job that we don't want to be part of anymore, or embark on being a parent, or choose not to be a parent, or whatever it is that really moves us to action in our lives, that is of service to the bigger picture. And that allows the tree branches to unfold in ways that are beneficial, not just to you, but to everyone around you. And that's really, I think, the great promise of flow. So she and I met by accident at the Louvre Museum due to the synchronicity of her getting invited to Paris and many other lucky breaks along the way that led us to being in the same room together. And it turns out she had been writing letters to me, and she couldn't send them to me because I was traveling. So she brought them with her to Paris, and she gave them to me, and we sat in the airport overnight and read the letters. So this is a special relationship, and ultimately we ended up getting married, and she's now my wife, and this has been a very much a soul journey for both of us.
I get so excited. I get this kind of goosebump feeling when I get a booking from a new client that I haven't met yet. And I get so excited because I know that somebody has made a decision to go really, really, really deep into their healing. And because I know that Ayurveda is not a quote unquote normal thing that many people have access to, at least not in the United States where I live. So I know that when someone books with me, that they've really made a decision that they want to go deep into their healing. And so you could do that on my website at heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. You can book me for either a Ayurvedic consultation if you're ready to dive in, or you can also book me for a 15-minute connection call if you're not sure where to go yet. I do have a couple offerings that are not on my website, and we could talk about that. So I look forward to meeting you. Oh my God, that's pretty much the best story I've ever heard of two people getting together.
Well, it really clued me in that there's something not only about physics. This isn't just psychology. It isn't just I made a pattern. Like with apophenia, we look for patterns in life, right? But this was an unbelievably unlikely situation that was extremely meaningful with two people that were the most important people in each other's lives, not just any friend. And I've done a calculation with these circumstances to try and show that it's more reasonable if we have an explanation for this type of situation rather than just write it off as luck or chance. It's not that my theory is correct, but I do think we need a better theory. And what I try and do is show that everything we know from fundamental physics and all the experiments and all the theories that we have are consistent with this possibility if we look carefully at the data. And so that's what I encourage people, especially scientists who are listening, that I'm not going out on a limb really in any of these steps. I'm just using very mainstream arguments, but with my own understanding of them in place.
Well, I think that's happening all the time in science anyway. I just don't think people are really aware of the fact that they're layering their condition into the design of their experiments.
Right. It's true. There's an element of that in quantum physics where we do firmly believe that quantum physics only applies to the microscopic. And this is actually layered in history because from the beginning, we've seen that microscopic systems like electrons can branch into many possibilities. This is where we get the model of a tree, these many possibilities of the state that an electron can be in. But when you get to macroscopic systems like Dana and myself, it doesn't apply anymore. And this is because when you combine all these small systems into a bigger system, all the effects cancel out. But this is actually rooted in the historical development of physics because we already conclude that we don't see this kind of, you never see like Dana in two places at once, right? She's always in a definite position. But that's only because we're observing her just in the same way that in the microscopic world, when we observe an electron, we see it in a definite state. And the main idea, I know this isn't a physics podcast, and the main idea is that the world around us is not actually definite until we observe it, until we interact with it. And so when you think about all the different ways your life can unfold from today forward, I encourage you to think about it not as an objective world out there that you're trying to control or influence, but as a tree of possibilities that has many different ways to fall into place for you. And how are you going to live and make choices that emphasizes the number of possibilities that there are rather than emphasizing the number of limitations that there are?
In your book, you suggest that healing is a choice that we make. And what does healing mean to you, and what steps do you suggest we actually take in healing ourselves?
Well, let me read a little bit from the passages of the book. So I write here, what I choose to do at any time is about building walls or opening up those walls. In my case, that I told this story of the synchronicity of my own difficulty early in life, I became less kind, less open, and less vulnerable. We become fractured by life. Not only as kids, but also as adults, we make unconscious choices when we feel threatened by daily experiences. These choices can persistently change the way we think about ourselves and others. We might choose to hide our culpability for a problem at work, or choose to get angry at a parent because they say something we don't like. Life comes at us fast, and most of us move through small traumas every day without stopping to process them. Our personality can easily ossify around our unconscious ways of managing these experiences. We methodically cover up our mistakes at work, or we stop listening the minute our father opens his mouth. This just becomes the way things are. So this is what I think is happening in our lives so often, is we just get used to the way things are based upon our filters, based upon the way that we interpret them. And when we interpret them once, we're more likely to interpret them the same way a second time. And we ossify or solidify our perceptions of the world around a set of beliefs or filters of what people intend for us. We might have this belief that nobody appreciates our contributions, and then that belief will continue to play itself out in many different ways at work or in our family. And the journey of healing is about identifying these filters, identifying what the traumas that led to conditioning, naming them, understanding that when this situation happens, in many different situations, I feel like my contribution doesn't matter. And then once you name it, you can begin to see how it can be shifted. Maybe it's not actually true for you. It's just an automatic response. And the importance of synchronicity in this process is that I think you will continue to be given the same opportunity to grow over and over. And life, everyone's had the experience of working at a job, leaving that job because it was not a good fit, taking a different job, and finding themselves in the same situation, like with a boss that they didn't like, or for the same reason. Or relationships, right? We leave relationships and then we end up in another relationship that has similar challenges. This is because these are synchronicities that are just repeating the past scenario with a chance for us to change, to learn from it and have a different choice. And what we change is those filters. Do we start to realize that, oh yeah, I'm seeing that I don't feel valued in my relationships. And that's really about my own mental story with myself, how I talk to myself and whether I value myself. We can make that change, and then we don't keep getting that experience again and again.
And if we do this work, your claim is that we could then live a more purpose-filled life. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I think that the idea of manifestation or the law of attraction, I'm trying to put those ideas on a more solid scientific footing. And part of that for me is, okay, what's it really good for? Once we understand or see the way that our life experiences do reflect our choices in ways that we couldn't see before. Like once we see that I end up in a relationship that's difficult, again, because I chose somebody to be with that had these qualities that I didn't really see early on, but they were evident. And seeing how our choices are impacting the direction of our lives, then we can obviously begin to make choices that lead towards a more holistic view of who we want to be, a whole view, like expressing ourselves more fully, giving ourselves permission to be a musician or be an artist or be a writer or have a full-time job or stay home and be a parent or, whatever it is that your path involves, be able to go for that. Because then once we see the power that we have to direct the direction of our lives, then there are bigger questions that emerge about what do we want to do with that. And I think the bigger questions for me are, we have this chance in history right now to come face to face with some historical legacies that can be shifted. I think it's really important that we see the way that racism shows up and privilege shows up in our society because of the interpretations and the filters that we have, because of the fears that we have of not having enough. And I want to make sure that me and my family is going to be taken care of at whatever expense. Like this is a choice that I think comes up in a lot of people's lives that we just have to, because the system of society is built around this individualism. And it's not that we need to get rid of individualism, but we need to notice when individualism comes from scarcity mindset, when it comes from a sense that I don't have enough and I need to gather all my resources together for me. That's not trusting in synchronicity, right? That's not believing that the next thing will unfold for me in a positive way. So I've got to protect myself. So once we see that we don't have to protect ourselves in the same way, I think it gives us, it soothes our fundamental insecurity to the point that we can actually engage more in relationship with people and with our lives in general that isn't about hoarding resources or exploiting other people. The environment is the same thing. We do exploit the environment. We don't think about the downstream impact of our choices on the environment. At least historically, we don't. And we make policies that offload the cost of disposing of computers, for instance. We don't even account for that in the making of those products. And so we certainly aren't really accounting for what are our children going to be dealing with 50 years from now. We're thinking really short term right now in our policy making. And so all of these questions can be addressed, I think, right now. And I think we should use the synchronicity that happen in life to, first of all, understand these issues at a deeper level. How do my choices plug into the bigger picture? And then to take bold action to try to make change. Because when we take bold action, the cosmos responds to it. It brings us another opportunity for change. Like right now, I've developed an interest in universal basic income, this idea that, there should be a floor of wealth for everybody, that they don't have to just feel like they're insecure month to month in their housing, for instance. And so I'm curious about this. I'm trying to learn about it. We're having conversations about it. And then it turns out that the timing is just right, because this week in my city and in cities around the United States, there's a national day of studying universal basic income. So synchronistically, there's a rally I'm going to this Saturday for that. And so when we make an intention to learn about something or make a change in our lives, synchronicities are those situations which show up in our lives to help it happen.
You talked about why we don't want to recognize and we don't see that we have the power to direct our lives. We are scared to feel that we have power because we're so used to feeling like we don't have power. What if I am a person who has power? What does that entail? Can I be trusted?
Yeah, that's such a deep and important question. There's a story I tell in my book that is a narrative between me and my daughter, really. I mean, it's not really about me and my daughter, but it is, So let me read that to you because I think it's really applicable here. I'm feeling nervous about my math test, Dad. Well, when is it? Tomorrow. Now with an edge in my voice. Well, have you studied? My daughter, a little exasperated. Yes, Dad, I studied, but my teacher just gave us the review sheet today. Okay, well, please go get your review sheet now and we'll go over it together. But now my daughter's indignant. But I'm in the middle of my spelling homework. I have to do this too. Oh, come on now. Your math test is really important and you've spent the whole afternoon on this other stuff. I didn't realize you had a math test. Let's get to it. So my daughter stomps off to get her review sheets. She says, fine. So how did I create this situation? To get to the answer to your question, I think that I can be in that situation where I've suddenly in this argument with my daughter and I'm feeling like, I don't like this. I don't know how it happened. I feel powerless. But I notice in myself that when I realize what I've done to lead to this situation, when I realize my role, acknowledge responsibility for something in a way that I couldn't see before, it actually is a big relief. You know what I mean? Because it empowers me to see there's something I can change. I'm playing a role in this. And it was in that statement, I don't know if you caught it, but when I responded to her with an edge in my voice and I said, well, have you studied? In that moment, I'm questioning her. I'm undermining her authority. I'm making her not believe in herself because I don't trust her. And that has an impact on her mood and her reaction to me. And I think this is true in dialogue around privilege and racism in our country, because when we don't see the role that we play in that dynamic, in the systemic racism, I'm not talking about individual beliefs of racism, but the systemic racism we live in and the privilege that certain groups of people have in different ways. When we don't see the role that we play, we're likely to take a stance that's more defensive and combative because we don't understand another person's point of view. But when we do see, for me, the more that I see the role that I do play in upholding systemic racism, it's a huge relief for me because suddenly I feel like there's something I can do, which is to begin to understand and talk about it more and change my behavior when I can. But it's about me, and I'm not just on the outside being affected by the system, having no control over it. So I think that when we can acknowledge the role that we play, and this is what the world is trying to teach us through synchronicity, it's trying to show us, look, you're part of this. Here's a way in which you are creating this dynamic. Then it gives us the opportunity and the power to change that dynamic. So I do have a second version of the script with my daughter. She starts off saying, I'm feeling really nervous about my math test. I say, when is it? She says, tomorrow. And this time I gently say, is there something I can do to help? So I'm asking her for her input on what I can do to help her, rather than imposing my own view on what she should do to fix the problem. And so instead she replies with, no, I just need to go over it again. The teacher just gave us the review sheet today, but I have to finish my spelling test first. Maybe you could help quiz me on that. So it's the same information, right? Same situation, but I've handled it in a different way where she's now receptive to my help and I know what she really wants for me to help with rather than imposing my solution onto her. And this is an analogy for how I think we can shift the narrative in the world around us and these bigger issues by listening at a deeper level with a desire to really be transformed and to learn from each other and to pay attention to each event as a synchronicity, which may be teaching us something about ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that also really relates to, when we have something going on in our health and we may or may not realize the things that we're doing to contribute to it. And I think that's actually the hardest thing as people go through a healing journey is actually coming to terms with the things that they've done to themselves.
I agree. And for me, my healing of my body, my relationship to my body is, well, first of all, you said people are afraid of feeling. It was a little bit out of context, but I think it was actually a much more broad statement that could be made. People are afraid of feeling. And I think it's feelings that guide the synchronicities. So the more we can allow the feelings in our lives to happen and hold them with compassion and skill, the more we can experience synchronicities, which are not trying to shake us awake, but are just supporting us. So a synchronicity that would be shaking us awake might be an illness that we have avoided dealing with, that we sort of knew might be coming, but we didn't really take the time to deal with it. But if we're listening to our lives and listening to our bodies and addressing grief when it happens, because we all experience loss and disappointment, addressing that as it happens, and we don't require a difficult situation from life to wake us up. We're actually living fully in the moment. Then I think the synchronicities we experience are more aligned with thriving and getting where we intended to go, but not just trying to shake us awake. So one of the ways we can improve our well-being is by really paying attention to our bodies and feeling what's happening in the moment, so we don't have to experience shakeups.
And this sort of leads to this last question here. What does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
Well, I learned in that time where I was really punishing my body as a way of trying to gain more control and discipline over myself and feel better. My mind was trying to feel better in my self-esteem by accomplishing something externally. And I had this dream about beating my head against a wall. I learned that my body, and in fact, me in general, is not the problem. And I can let go of trying to be perfect, let go of trying to have perfect health or perfect exercise or perfect well-being, and see that well-being is just a part of physical well-being is a support system for mental well-being for me. And my mental well-being, my desire to feel good about myself is, or whatever it might look like for someone else, the mental well-being is driving the choices we make, and it's in service to and given service by our physical well-being. And so these two aspects of our lives are both mutually important. And when we can get them both serving each other, then we can actually look at how can I contribute to the world in a way that's productive and can offer solutions. But until we are taking care of ourselves mentally and emotionally and physically, then I think we tend to project solutions onto other people that really are about us. And I think this is maybe underlying the history of colonialization. When we come at the world from a perspective that we're unhappy or dissatisfied with ourselves and our lot in life, we actually might get even more certain that our way of viewing things is correct and think that other people need to look at things our way. And then we try to impose our point of view on another person to solve their problems. But really what we're doing is dissatisfied with our problems and trying, so we should turn it around, look inside. What is it that I want to learn from and grow in my life? Who do I want to become? And that is the focus that we take into the world. And then we can really be of service, not trying to fix other people or the world or climate change or racism, but trying to just be fully ourselves and see how that contributes.
Sky, thank you so much for being with us here today. And when we have some listeners who want to get in touch with you, learn about your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, my website is synchronicityinstitute.com, and I have a monthly workshop that I lead that you can find out more about at physicsofwholeness.com. And I'm on all sorts of social media, so you can find me there too.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Heather. It's been really a delight to talk with you.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.